I wake up every morning at 5:30. Not because I have to, but because I prefer the quiet, before the traffic starts, before messages arrive, before the world begins to look at me. My daughter, Leela, sleeps in the small bedroom across the hall. I stand in the kitchen while the kettle boils and watch the sky change color through the narrow window. Those 10 minutes are mine. No expectations, no explanations. My life is simple, structured. Breakfast at 6. Hair braided neatly. Lunch packed carefully. We leave the apartment at 7:10. I drop her at school and go straight to work. I manage accounts for a mid-sized company. Numbers behave, they do not whisper. They do not judge. If something is missing, there is always a reason. 3 years ago, my husband said he felt trapped. He did not shout. He did not accuse. He just said he wanted a different life, something easier, something that did not involve routine or responsibility. I remember standing in the doorway as he packed a suitcase. I did not cry in front of him. I waited until Leela was asleep that night. After that, I stopped expecting help from anyone. Family called at first. They asked careful questions. They offered advice I did not need. Over time, the calls became less frequent. I understood. People are uncomfortable around failure. Divorce makes others uneasy. It reminds them that stability is fragile. So I adjusted. I built a system. I track expenses. I avoid debt. I cook at home. I do not complain. When other mothers at school ask about Leela's father, I say, he lives in another city. That is enough. Silence protects dignity. When my cousin sent the wedding invitation, I considered declining. Weddings are celebrations of permanence. I'm no longer part of that category, but Leela was excited. She wanted to wear a white dress. She asked if there would be music. She asked if I would dance. I told myself it was just one evening. I trusted that family would remember who I was before the divorce, before the whispers, before the labels. I am not dramatic. I am not reckless. I am not bitter. I am careful. And careful people believe they can manage uncomfortable situations by staying quiet. The night of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. I chose a modest dress. Nothing bold. Nothing that would attract attention. I tied my hair back. I told myself we would sit politely, congratulate the bride, eat dinner, and leave early. I believed I understood the room I was walking into. The discomfort did not begin with words. It began with placement. When we arrived at the reception hall, the host smiled too brightly and checked her list twice before guiding us to our table. It was near the back, close to the service doors where waiters moved in and out with trays. The music sounded distant there. Conversations from the central tables did not reach us clearly. I told myself it was random. Leela did not notice. She was distracted by the lights hanging from the ceiling and the polished dance floor reflecting everything like glass. I noticed who sat at the tables closer to the stage. Married couples, families with matching outfits, women who still wore their rings. At our table were distant relatives and 2 empty seats. When I stood to greet an aunt across the room, her expression shifted briefly before settling into something polite. She kissed the air beside my cheek. "You look well," she said. It was not a compliment, it was an evaluation. I thanked her and asked about her son. She answered quickly, then excused herself to speak to someone else. That was the first small cut. Later, while Leela was at the dessert table, I overheard 2 women behind me. "She came alone." "Yes." A pause. "Well, that's brave." The word did not sound kind. I kept my posture straight and pretended to study the floral arrangements. When I returned to my seat, one of my cousins leaned toward me. He smelled of cologne and champagne. "You should relax tonight," he said quietly. "Maybe you'll meet someone." I smiled faintly. "I'm here for the wedding." "Of course," he replied, grinning. "But you never know." He walked away before I could answer. It was subtle, all of it. No one insulted me directly. No one told me I did not belong. But every interaction felt measured, like I was being assessed against something invisible and failing quietly. Leela came back holding a small cupcake. "Why does Aunt Sarah keep looking at us?" she asked. "She's just busy," I said, but I had noticed it too. Across the hall, several relatives were watching intermittently, not openly staring, just observing. Conversations paused slightly when I moved between tables. Smiles tightened. At one point, I approached the bride to congratulate her. She hugged me carefully, as if my presence might wrinkle her dress. "I'm glad you came," she said. There was relief in her tone, not warmth. As I walked back to my seat, I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Awareness. The groom's family occupied the front tables. Wealthier, louder, more confident. I noticed a few men in tailored suits scanning the room with detached interest. Their expressions were unreadable. One of them looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. Not in admiration, in curiosity. As if trying to place me, I looked away first. When dinner was served, the waiters skipped our table initially. It was a small logistical mistake. They corrected it quickly, but the delay felt symbolic. I told myself I was imagining patterns. I reminded myself that not everything is intentional. Still, a quiet thought began forming. This was not accidental seating. This was positioning. I had been placed where I could be seen but not included, present but peripheral, a reminder of something no one wanted at a wedding: instability. Leela leaned against me as the music grew louder. "Are we staying long?" she asked. "For a little while," I said. I smoothed her hair and kept my eyes on the dance floor, where couples moved easily under warm lights. The discomfort was still manageable. It had not yet turned into humiliation. But I could feel it building, slow and deliberate, like pressure behind glass. And I was beginning to understand that I was not simply a guest that night. The shift from subtle to visible happened during the toasts. The groom's older brother stood with a microphone, smiling too confidently. He thanked the guests, praised the bride, made a few predictable jokes about marriage. The room responded with rehearsed laughter. Then his eyes moved across the tables. They paused on me. "And of course," he added casually, "it's always good to see families show up no matter their circumstances." A few people chuckled. It was quiet, but not quiet enough. I felt the heat rise to my face. I kept my expression neutral. Leela was tracing patterns on the tablecloth beside me, unaware. The brother continued speaking as if nothing unusual had happened. But the message had been delivered. I lowered my gaze and inhaled slowly. I told myself it was indirect. It could have meant anyone. Then my cousin leaned across the table again. "Don't take it personally," he whispered. "He's just joking." I had not reacted, I had not spoken, yet I was already being instructed how to feel. That was the first clear signal. Later, near the buffet line, I overheard something less ambiguous. "She should be careful," a woman said softly. "Single women at weddings make people uncomfortable." "Why?" another voice replied. "They look available." Words settled heavily in my stomach. Available, as if I were an object placed in a room. I stepped forward before they noticed me listening. Both women stiffened when they saw me. Their smiles appeared too quickly. "You look lovely tonight," one of them said. I thanked her calmly. When I returned to the table, Leela was frowning. "Mom," she said quietly, "why did that girl say dads don't stay with us?" My chest tightened. "What girl?" She pointed discreetly toward a group of children near the dance floor. "Said if dads leave, it means something is wrong." I felt something shift inside me then, not sadness, recognition. This was not random commentary. It had traveled from adult conversations to children's mouths. I knelt beside Leela's chair. "There is nothing wrong with us," I said evenly. "Sometimes adults make choices, that's all." She studied my face carefully, searching for confirmation. I held her gaze steady. Across the room, I noticed a few relatives watching the interaction, not concerned. Observing, that was when the thought became clear. I had not simply been invited out of obligation. I had been invited as contrast. A reminder of what happens when a marriage fails. A quiet warning displayed beside white flowers and gold decorations. The realization did not come with anger. It came with stillness. And that stillness felt heavier than humiliation. I decided to speak quietly before things went further. Not to cause a scene. Not to demand anything. Just to draw a boundary. I found my aunt near the hallway leading to the restrooms. She was checking her phone, her expression serious until she noticed me. "Everything all right?" she asked, already sounding cautious. "I just wanted to mention something," I said calmly. "Some of the comments tonight, they've been uncomfortable for me and for Leela." Her face changed immediately, not to concern, but to defense. "Oh, don't start," she said lightly. "It's a wedding, people are joking." "I understand that," I replied. "But jokes travel. The children are repeating things." She sighed as if I had disappointed her. "You're too sensitive," she said. "No one is attacking you. You can't expect everyone to tiptoe around your situation." My situation, as if I were a condition. "I'm not asking anyone to tiptoe," I said. "Just basic respect." She folded her arms. "You chose your life," she replied. "You can't be upset that people notice." There it was, choice, as if abandonment had been mutual. As if I had selected this version of my life for attention. "I didn't choose to be left," I said quietly. She looked away, already finished with the conversation. "You should focus on enjoying the night," she added. "Don't make this about you." The sentence landed harder than the earlier jokes. I had not raised my voice. I had not accused anyone publicly, yet somehow I was now the problem. When I returned to the table, I felt smaller, not because they were right, but because I could see the system clearly. If I reacted, I would confirm their narrative, emotional, unstable, bitter. If I stayed silent, I would absorb it quietly. Either way, the weight was mine. Leela looked up at me. "Are we leaving?" she asked again. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stand, take her hand, and walk out without explanation. But another part resisted. If I left, they would say I could not handle being around happiness. If I stayed, I would endure the scrutiny. I chose to stay, not out of pride, out of refusal. I would not disappear to make others comfortable. Still, as the music grew louder and the laughter continued, I could feel the isolation deepening. Conversations curved around me. Smiles felt measured. Even kindness felt performative. The dismissal was more painful than the mockery, because it suggested the cruelty was reasonable, and that I was unreasonable for noticing it. I sat upright, hands folded neatly in my lap, and reminded myself of something simple. Silence does not mean agreement, but it does have a cost. The room shifted the moment he arrived. I didn't know who he was at first, just a tall man in a dark suit, moving slowly through the crowd, scanning every table with quiet authority. Conversation stilled subtly as he passed, like the air itself was holding its breath. Someone whispered my name. I turned. His eyes met mine, not curious, not hungry, calm. Assessing, everything around him seemed smaller, less important, except the space he claimed with a single glance. He stopped near my table. Nobody asked him to sit, yet he pulled a chair out and lowered himself gracefully beside me. Leela's small hand found mine instinctively. I didn't speak, I only watched. A cousin, the one who had joked about finding me a sponsor, leaned in, smiling politely. "And who might this be?" He turned slightly, his voice low but steady. "She is with me." The room paused. Glasses lingered mid-air. Conversations vanished. The statement wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that crushed all ridicule. The cousin's grin faltered. I felt my chest tighten, not from relief, but from sudden clarity. Power had entered the room quietly. Its presence alone corrected the imbalance. He asked about Leela casually, gently. He didn't act as if rescuing us was heroic. There was no fanfare, no show, just simple acknowledgement we were seen. Later, someone attempted a snide comment about my single status. The words barely left their lips before he interrupted, calm and deliberate. "Not tonight." Silence stretched. I realized then what had been missing all evening: recognition, not approval. I had been humiliated not because of what I'd done, but because no one had spoken for me. Now, his presence alone made that cruelty impossible. I studied his face as he glanced around the room. Polite, controlled, unshakable. I did not know him. And yet I understood that tonight the people who intended to shame me were suddenly on the defensive. Leela leaned against me. "Who is he?" she whispered. "A friend," I said, though I knew it was incomplete. I didn't need to explain further. The room had already shifted. Respect, long denied, was now quietly demanded. For the first time since we arrived, I felt a strange mixture of safety and disbelief. Humiliation was no longer the center of my night. The world had realigned itself, quietly with him at the axis. And in that moment, I understood something essential. Dignity, when absent, is invisible. Power, when present, exposes what has always been true. The people who mocked, whispered, and measured me against invisible standards now felt exposed themselves. Not publicly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. And I realized, with an odd weight in my chest, that some truths only emerge when someone else chooses to name them aloud. The tension in the room changed the moment he sat beside me, but it didn't end there. Relatives who had been whispering, smirking, and folding their judgments into polite laughter now shifted uncomfortably. They spoke in softer tones, measured their movements, and avoided eye contact. Every glance in our direction carried caution, a subtle recalculation of who held authority. He did not speak loudly. He did not announce ownership or heroics. He simply treated me and Leela as if we belonged, calm, deliberate, and unshakable. When the groom's father approached, attempting to intervene on behalf of the cousin who had mocked me, the boss's quiet authority stopped him mid-sentence. A single sentence, low and steady. "Let her be. Respect is enough tonight." The man paused, glanced at me, and nodded, but there was no argument, no theatrics, just acquiescence. Throughout the evening, he asked questions, about Leela, about my work, about life, but in a way that was measured, not invasive. He noticed small details: the bracelet Leela wore, the way I smoothed my hair back when I was nervous, the careful tone I used when I tried to deflect. Every detail mattered, and his attention was deliberate, never performative. Other guests attempted to fill the space with polite conversation, but their confidence faltered. A woman who had made jokes about my single status now avoided our table entirely. Men who had smiled at their own cleverness walked past with hurried steps, their laughter muted. The more he remained calm, the louder their discomfort became. I realized that humiliation was not just social, it was a system, and power had its own rules. The people who had plotted it quietly began to bend under its weight. At one point, someone attempted to clarify my single status in a way meant to embarrass me again. He interjected softly, almost conversationally. "She is not alone tonight, that is enough." A pause, a recalibration. The sentence required nothing else. I noticed then how fragile their confidence had always been, how easily it shifted when confronted with authority. Their whispers turned into silence, their smirks into careful observation. Leela leaned against me, her small shoulder warm. She did not understand everything that was happening, but she sensed the change. I felt it too, not relief, not triumph, but a quiet realignment. The rules had shifted. No one spoke further of my past failures or current status. No one dared. And yet it was not a spectacle. No applause, no dramatic confrontation. Only the slow, steady correction of a balance that had been tipped long before I arrived. By the end of the night, I understood a truth I had never known. Cruelty often survives because power is absent. But when someone with power steps in, not to punish but to witness, the scales tip quietly, permanently, without fanfare. I held Leela's hand tightly. We did not speak. We did not need to. Everything had changed, and yet nothing had to be announced. I did not cry, not yet. I sat at the edge of the table, Leela tucked close beside me, and watched the room as it adjusted around him. Every smirk, every whispered remark, every carefully measured glance had vanished. The people who had mocked me were now cautious, polite, even tentative. Their confidence had been replaced with the faint tremor of awareness. I felt it too, the weight shifting inside me. Relief was there, yes, but under it something heavier. Recognition. That all these months, all these years, I had been navigating life under the assumption that my dignity was mine alone to preserve. That silence, patience, and restraint were enough. He had changed that, quietly, calmly, without a single dramatic gesture. I realized how fragile respect had been before him. How easily the world dismissed me, how easily my daughter's presence could have been minimized. How carefully I had learned to protect her from the whispers, the assumptions, the invisible judgments. And yet in that same moment I felt something unexpected, the truth of my own vulnerability. Not shame, not humiliation, but an understanding of the cost I had borne alone. I had carried it quietly, with measured words and careful movements, for fear of exposing too much. The boss leaned toward me once when Leela was laughing at a joke he had made softly. "You've done well," he said, not praising me, not rescuing me. Just noting what had been quietly obvious to him. The careful survival, the quiet competence, the restraint that kept us upright in a world eager to topple us. I wanted to speak, to thank him, to explain the weight of the years behind that simple phrase. But I could not. My throat tightened. My hands fidgeted with the edge of my dress. I realized that saying anything would diminish the truth, would try to transform the clarity of the moment into words, and words could never hold it. For the first time, I let myself feel the full extent of the injustice I had endured. The isolation, the humiliation, the constant negotiation with social expectation. It had been real. It had been deliberate. And it had shaped every decision I had made for Leela, every careful step in the life I had rebuilt. But sitting there in his quiet presence, I understood another truth. The world does not have to celebrate you for the damage to be noticed. Sometimes acknowledgement alone is enough to shift everything. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the weight settle. It was heavy, it was real. And for the first time, I allowed myself to accept it without resentment or anger, only clarity. When I opened them again, Leela was watching me, wide-eyed, unaware of the unspoken lessons unfolding. I smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Nothing had been fixed. Nothing had been reversed, but the truth had emerged. And in that truth, I found something I had long thought impossible: quiet relief. The wedding continued around us, but the atmosphere had changed. I noticed it immediately. Relatives who had whispered, who had smiled at my supposed misfortune, now kept their distance. Their words were polite, careful. Their laughter more measured. The confidence they had worn like armor had slipped, replaced by subtle tension. Every glance they cast in my direction was tentative, as though the air itself reminded them of what had happened. The cousin who had joked about finding me a sponsor avoided my eyes completely. I caught him staring at the floor when the boss's calm attention rested on our table. The woman who had made remarks about single women at weddings moved quietly, hovering near the dessert table, no longer comfortable in her own judgments. It was not dramatic. There were no confrontations. No public humiliation reversed. No announcements of who was right or wrong. The consequences were quiet, imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention. I observed the groom's father whisper to another guest, likely explaining why our table had shifted subtly into the center of attention. The authority in the room had shifted. Systems of hierarchy, carefully maintained, began to correct themselves quietly. The people who had believed themselves untouchable now realized their cruelty had limits. The boss said very little, only enough to demonstrate that respect was not negotiable. "Respect is not expensive," he had said earlier, and those words lingered in the room like a shadow. They didn't cheer. They didn't applaud. They merely adjusted. Leela leaned against me, sleepy and oblivious to the subtle power dynamics. I held her hand and felt the weight of the night settle over me. The lesson was clear. Cruelty carries consequences, but only if someone chooses to expose it, even silently. Later, when we prepared to leave, the same relatives offered smiles that were careful, practiced, and unconvincing. I could see their discomfort in the way they avoided meeting my gaze. No one said a word about the earlier jokes or whispers, but their behavior had changed. The hierarchy had been corrected, quietly, permanently. I tucked Leela into the car seat and adjusted her jacket, noticing how small she looked against the dim light of the parking lot. She chattered about the lights and the music, unaware of the emotional weight carried through the hall behind her. I realized that power does not always need to act visibly. Sometimes, it is enough for someone to simply acknowledge injustice. The consequences ripple silently, affecting those who assumed their cruelty would never be noticed. Driving home, I did not feel triumphant. There was no victory, only clarity. The people who had mocked me had been reminded, subtly and firmly, that respect is not optional. And I understood that sometimes the quietest interventions leave the deepest marks. By the time we reached our apartment, I felt drained but unbroken. The night had changed me, not by granting satisfaction, not by erasing pain, but by revealing the truth. A quiet, heavy truth, undeniable in its presence. And in that truth, the consequences of cruelty became permanent, even if unspoken. Weeks passed after the wedding. Life returned to its rhythm, but nothing felt quite the same. Invitations to other gatherings came with a different tone, polite, restrained, careful. The subtle acknowledgments of the night lingered in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. I walked through each day with the memory of that evening folded quietly inside me. Leela continued her routines, her laughter at school, and the park a reminder that innocence could survive even when the adults around you faltered. I watched her closely, noticing the small ways she mirrored my caution and resilience. She had been too young to understand the nuances of humiliation, yet she had felt the tension. I had guided her through it the only way I could, with calm, silence, and quiet protection. I did not hear from the boss again, not by phone, not by message. The night had been enough. He had corrected the imbalance, exposed the cruelty without spectacle, and then left it behind. And that, I realized, was part of the lesson. Power can shift situations quietly, without fanfare, but its effects linger long after the person has gone. My relatives avoided unnecessary commentary, and the cousins who had mocked me no longer joked about my single status. The wedding's echoes remained, not as entertainment or gossip, but as reminders of truth revealed. I understood, finally, how easily people could be cruel when they felt unchecked, and how fragile their certainty became when confronted with even subtle authority. I held onto these observations privately. I did not lecture anyone, did not declare triumph. There was no revenge, no spotlight. The change existed only in the quiet, in the way conversations adjusted, in the respect that was silently extended rather than demanded. Some nights I would tuck Leela into bed and linger by her side, tracing her hair back from her forehead, thinking of the events that had unfolded. I felt gratitude and heaviness at once, gratitude for the recognition, for the subtle defense, and heaviness because the truth of cruelty and isolation was undeniable, even if corrected for a moment. I realized that life does not always offer closure. Sometimes it offers understanding. Sometimes it offers quiet correction. And sometimes, the aftermath is simply the knowledge that injustice can be acknowledged, even without dramatic justice or overt celebration. I poured her milk, straightened the blankets, and kissed her temple. She drifted to sleep, unaware of the lessons etched quietly into the night, and I stayed at the doorway watching shadows fall across the room. There was a strange weight in the stillness, a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The world had not changed entirely, but for now, the worst had been acknowledged. I closed the door softly, leaving her to rest. Silence filled the apartment, and in that silence, heavy and calm, I understood what had been earned, not triumph, not vengeance, but truth. That truth was mine to carry quietly, and I carried it with a measured breath, steady hands, and the knowledge that dignity, once witnessed, could endure.